To make this a little quick, because we're not quite sure what's going to happen on the floor here. They may move things pretty quick. Needless to say, Susan and I walked into Senator Reid's office yesterday, offered him a proposal, and told him we had the votes to do it. We can expand for another 3 months unemployment insurance for those who need it the most. A lot of people in my state, across this country, that really need the help, this $300 a month. And there's a group of us here, as you can see, that is concerned about this as anybody on the other side. So we walked in, Susan and I walked into Senator Reid's office and said, we have the votes for this proposal. And as most of you know, it was a 3-month proposal, and it was paid for. And we also helped with the reverse the COLA decreases that came in the original Budget Act before we went out on recess. We thought it was a common sense proposal, something that was paid for. There were no gimmicks involved in it, and actually Senator Reid seemed pretty receptive on that. But it appears at his lunch today that that's just not the case, and frankly, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. We're back to ground zero. I think we're going to have a couple of maneuvers here on the floor, but we just wanted to make sure, and I want to bring Susan up here next, but we just wanted to make sure that you were aware, that the people here in Washington, D.C. and back home were aware that there's a group of us that really believe in the importance of making sure that the most needy have the unemployment insurance that they need, that if they've lost their jobs, doesn't necessarily mean that they would lose their homes. So, Susan, why don't you come up, give us a little bit broader explanation, but I just wanted to start it off that way.
First of all, let me thank all the members of this group who have worked so hard over the weekend and during the past couple of days to put together what is a good faith effort to get us out of this impasse. As Senator Heller says, our proposal has 3 parts. First of all, it would extend unemployment insurance for the long-term unemployed for an additional 3 months, and it incorporates Senator Reid's proposal to shorten the number of weeks for those states that are in what are called Tier 2 and Tier 3. We tried to take as many of Senator Reid's provisions as possible. Second, our proposal truly pays for this extension as well as for the restoration of the military COLA, something that all of us support, but Senator Ayotte had offered the First Amendment on this bill. Our proposal, unlike Senator Reid's, would bring within the 10-year budget window the cuts that are necessary to offset the expense of extending unemployment compensation for 3 months and restoring the military retiree COLA. It does so without deepening the cuts in the Medicare program, which is a problem that we had with the majority leader's proposal, which would be very detrimental to our hospitals, for example. Other than that, it affects the exact same programs that Senator Reid would affect, but instead of waiting to pay for this 11 and 12 years from now, it would do so within the 10-year budget window, and thus it would be scored by the Congressional Budget Office as paying for it. I will yield to my colleagues to talk further about it. Let me just say that our interest is in coming up with a solution, not scoring partisan political points. And I am still hopeful that while it does not look very good right now, that we can come together and accomplish that goal. One positive part of this negotiation has been that Senator Reid has, for the first time, indicated a willingness to allow Republicans to offer amendments. And that is an important change in the way that we have been operating. Unfortunately, if there are barriers to offering those amendments in terms of the number of votes that you might have to have in order for them to prevail, that would not be as positive a development.
Yeah, I think the major point here is that we want to continue to negotiate to try to come up with a solution. That's what this group has been about from the start. I'm disappointed to hear some reports that the leader may go to the floor and use some procedural points to try to end that negotiation, at least for now. But we're not going to give up. We're going to stay in this game. We think it's important. We believe that our current situation is unacceptable. We have the largest number of long-term unemployed Americans ever in our history. The unemployment insurance system is important, but frankly, it's not working to address the concerns that we have right now in our economy. There are jobs going open because the skills aren't there. Many of us in this group have ideas that could help to improve and reform the unemployment insurance system, provide people the skills they need to access some of those great opportunities and jobs. And that's what we ought to be doing as a country. We also believe as a group that we need more pro-growth policies to be able to get this economy moving. But we were willing, as a group, to move forward with a 3-month extension with the understanding this would be a time for us over the next few months to make those reforms, to make those improvements. All I would add to what was said already about our good faith effort here is that the pay-fors that we agreed to were not our first choice. They instead were building off of the Majority Leader's own proposal. Specifically, as you know, some of us offered an amendment that would not allow for double dipping between unemployment insurance and Social Security disability insurance. Senator Reid didn't like our proposal, but he had one of his own. And so his, rather than saving $5.5 billion, saves $1 billion. We were willing to go along with that. We thought it was a step in the right direction. In essence, says if you get unemployment insurance that your SSDI is decreased dollar for dollar by that amount. So we went with his exact proposal in our pay-for. Now, the other pay-for that we have deals with the sequester, not on the discretionary side, but on the mandatory side, non-military, which is the same thing that he dealt with his proposal. Now, he took it out beyond the 10 years, in other words, extended to 10, 11, 12 years from now, these pay-fors. We instead said, well, let's use these same programs and instead have a very slight decrease in those programs over the next 10 years, keeping within the budget window. It's about a 1.7% decrease, by the way, in these important programs, and we think that's fair, and we think that that's appropriate, and that would have paid for both the UI extension to be able to do the reforms we talked about, but second, it also takes care of this issue that all of us care deeply about, which is not singling out our military and dealing with the Veterans COLA issue that seemed on a bipartisan basis to be something everyone wanted to deal with a few weeks ago when we dealt with the budget. So we're hopeful that today's procedural votes on the floor will not be the end of this process, but rather, unfortunately, just getting us off track temporarily so we can get back to work, determining how do we do the right thing, the responsible thing, for those constituents we represent who are long-term unemployed and are not getting the assistance that they're looking for and they need through the current UI program.
My colleagues have spoken about the specifics of the bill itself. I, from the beginning, have felt that there's a larger issue here along with this, and it's not just for the unemployment insurance issue. It goes to the right of the majority to participate in how legislation is formed. If you'll recall, just last week, we had quite a debate on the floor. Senator Reid basically said amendments have no place in this process. He reversed that position. We were thankful for that. Hopefully, if there is any positive here, it's a consideration by the Majority Leader and his caucus that there is a better way to legislate than simply one party dictating to the other, this is it, take it or leave it. We made a step in the right direction. We didn't get there, unfortunately. I think what we'll be hearing in the next few minutes here is that we are not going to have the ability to do what we had hoped we were able to do, but we've hopefully opened up the debate about the rights of the minority to participate in the process of legislating on behalf of the American people, and the rights of those of us in the majority to represent the interests of our states fully by a fair vote, up or down, not a process which has basically been gamed so that even though we could offer amendments, they're going to be defeated. It's been acknowledged on the other side. And then we have to then concede our rights on final, in a way to keep it alive through simply a majority vote, which we don't, the right of us to protest that through budget or through cloture is taken away.
I first of all want to thank my colleagues. We have been working together to try to solve the problem. And I think where we find ourselves now, 6 of us voted to get on this bill and to debate this issue, hoping that we could come together with the other side and find a way to pay for the unemployment benefit extension with legitimate pay for. And my interest as well, and all of my colleagues, is to solve the military COLA retire unfair cuts to our military. And when we began that discussion, we also found that there were some of our other colleagues that I'm glad are here today that wanted to join us to try to solve this problem. So where we find ourselves today is that we came up with a good faith proposal, one that would extend the unemployment insurance for 3 months, as the president had requested, to help those who are struggling. It would have reversed the unfair cuts to our military, who were singled out in the most recent budget agreement that both sides of the aisle have expressed an interest in fixing. And finally, with a legitimate pay for. It wasn't a pay for, as has been mentioned, that many of us wanted. I myself had an amendment that would have paid for this very differently. But what we did is we took the majority leader's pay for and made it one that could be scored within the budget window, really, and took that and trying to take their ideas of compromise as well as the compromise on the measure to ensure that those who are disabled and collecting on insurance, that we treat that issue properly. And we took their proposal rather than Senator Portman's proposal, which is also a very, very good proposal. So we came forward in good faith to offer this. Unfortunately, what we're hearing is that the majority leader will reject this now. But I think what you're hearing from all of us is that we are open to wanting to solve this problem. I know that we also want to continue to work together to solve the problem of the unfair cuts to our military retirees that were targeted in the most recent budget agreement, and that we are hopeful that our good faith of wanting to negotiate and wanting to resolve these problems in Washington, that we can move forward from here and take this and build upon something, because we know that the American people want us to solve problems. And that's what brought all of us together today, to solve this problem. We think our agreement was a good one. We're disappointed that it was rejected, but we remain open to discussing this to try to resolve it in a responsible way on behalf of taxpayers and also helping those who are in need. So I want to thank the leadership of my colleagues behind me and for their great work and how much work our staffs have put together of trying to come up with this good faith proposal over the last several days. Thank you.
I don't want to repeat much of what has been said. Kelly has used the term over and over. What you're looking at here is a group that's come together to try to solve the problem rather than just engage in more messaging. There are people who are hurting out there. We recognize that. We recognize that we have a long-term unemployment compensation program that seriously needs reform. And on the other hand, as Senator Coates has noted, we've got a Senate that needs a little bit of help here, a little bit of reform when it comes to a viable, meaningful amendment process. So when we came together, it was not to come up with a Republican proposal. It was to take pieces from what the president had proposed, a 3-month extension that would allow us to get to long-term reforms, to find a pay for that our colleagues on the other side would accept. So we followed the model that Senator Reid laid out in terms of what he had proposed. And then, of course, again, trying to address something that we all agree needs to be taken care of, and that's how we deal with the COLA for our military retirees. And then you inject in that a process for amendments, and not, to use Senator Reid's word, gotcha amendments, but amendments that will truly address the issue, relevant amendments to get us back on track as a Senate. So I think our proposal, our good faith negotiated proposal, could have advanced so much of that. I hope that the door is not closed.
I just kind of want to go to that bottom line question that I brought up the other day, and that was on the proposal that Senator Ayotte had, which I co-sponsored, as well as co-sponsoring this proposal with this great group, and would have been happy to be on Rob's bill as well. My point being, this is the third time we've put up a legitimate pay for that's being rejected. So here's the bottom line question. For the majority party in the Senate, is this about a soundbite? Or is this about actually extending unemployment benefits? And I think they need to answer that question. All along we've said we'll provide support for extending unemployment benefits, but we want to have a pay for. So the majority party said, okay, we'll come up with a pay for. This is the third one. And we actually take some of the majority leader's ideas and incorporate them into a very legitimate pay for. So what we're trying to do is get a pay for, to extend unemployment benefits, and then also engage in a process for reform. So we're not just helping somebody when they don't have a job, we're helping them get a job. Furthermore, this legislation, if it passes the Senate, it has to get through the House. So let's talk reality. If these things aren't in it, it's not passing the House. So I go back to the point that I brought up at the outset. Does the majority party really want to pass legislation that would extend unemployment benefits? Or is this all about a soundbite?
I was one of the ones that voted in opposition to the cloture motion the first time around. I came to the table with this great group because I sat on the floor of the Senate and listened to Kelly, listened to Dan, and listened to Rob and their passionate debate last Thursday night. And I've got a feeling Harry Reid watched the replays like a football coach would after a losing game, because that was not a good performance. Just summarily reject amendments whatsoever and not allow participation, even if it was a minority. And when I found out there were negotiations going on and people were talking, I wanted to be a part of it. I regret it didn't culminate in an agreement, and I think the agreement that this group came up with and Senator Reid came up with tentatively was the right thing for America, the right thing for the employed, and the right thing for the unemployed. Hopefully this is a template, but I hope everybody will rewatch again Thursday night's debate on the floor, because the United States Senate is better than a Senate that doesn't offer amendments, doesn't offer solutions, and doesn't find common ground to work together.
Thanks, Johnny. Why don't we, I just want to reiterate one point, and that is we have the votes to pass this bill. This bill can be passed. And, the real difference we have with what their proposal came is they're basically telling us is that we have to have 60 votes to pass our amendments, and then guarantee that the bill passes. And I don't think that that's really a common sense approach here in the United States Senate. That's changing a lot of rules around here. I don't think we should have to come up and have a threshold of 60 votes and 50 for them. Think about that. The minority party has to have 60 votes to pass any of their amendments, but they get to pass everything with a 50 vote threshold. Simply doesn't make a lot of sense. So we'll take questions.
If I may, I have one process and one substance question.
Sure.
On the process, on that point, what Democrats say that they're concerned about is that you all will, this group in particular, will not vote for final passage. If they could go through all of these amendments that Reid wants to put on, including one on your proposal, if they all fail, then you all, at the end of the day, will not vote to pass the bill, but it'll still be blocked. So everybody will take a lot of tough votes for no reason.
Well, first of all, I can only speak for myself. But I've said all along, I've always wanted to pay for it. But I'll support this. I believe in unemployment insurance to the point that I will support the bill if, in fact, the amendments do fail. So I'm different, and I would support the legislation. I let them speak for themselves. I'll let them speak.
So they're saying we have to agree, we guarantee to pass a bill and we don't even know what's in it yet? How does that work?
Well, let me add just a point on this. What our group agreed to in our good faith effort is that if it passed, if the majority leader embraced it and made it a compromise proposal, we would vote for it. And that's sufficient to allow the bill to move forward. Because when you add us to the Democratic votes, you've clearly got enough. And that was our whole goal, was to break through this impasse with a compromise that incorporated concepts from both sides, that was fair, and that accomplished the goal of helping the long-term unemployed and military retirees. So the votes are here.
Can I also add, too, I mean, first of all, I don't understand this concept of we have to take a lot of tough votes. We were elected to the United States Senate to take tough votes on behalf of our constituents and the American people. So that, to me, is absurd from anyone on both sides of the aisle. But the second piece is, just to make an important understanding here, is that we, as Senator Collins just said we wanted an agreement. We came forward and said, here's an agreement we can vote for. Let's try to work something out. And so we brought forward the votes to be able to get this done. And then in terms of where we are right now with the amendments, it's a double standard. This is a double standard that we've been put forward right now, where 60 votes for all of our proposals and 50 votes for theirs. So it's one thing if we're all the same standard, where we were all operating on the same vote threshold, but that's not the proposal that we've been given back, unfortunately. I'm glad that there's progress, that the majority leader wants to let us have some votes. That's obviously good, as my colleagues have said, and I appreciate that. But you can't have a double standard.
And on your proposal, sorry, but on the substance of it, what many Democrats are saying, the reason they don't like it is because the way you pay for it, because of where you're excluding, that you're basically taking money out of the pot of money that would go to the same people who would benefit from unemployment benefits. As one person said, you're not just robbing Peter to pay Paul, you're robbing Peter to pay Peter.
Right. You should explain. It's the same programs that Senator Reid. Go ahead.
It's Senator Reid's proposal in the budget window.
Right.
So you can actually score it.
Increase, right? What he proposed was in 2024 extending a year.
Same cuts,
No,
just a shorter period of time.
It's
That's
in the
what it
budget
is.
window, so it
It's a
actually
slight
scores
uptick,
as
absolutely, from 6.3% to 8 overall, but in terms of this one portion, I'll let Senator Portman speak to that. But understand, Senator Reid's proposal was subject to a budget point of order because it does not score with CBO. So, as you all know, it's not a pay-for around here unless it can be scored. His proposal cannot be scored within the budget window.
And remember, that's only part of it. You also have the not double counting between unemployment benefits and disability benefits. It's both.
We've called votes.
They did call vote.
Dan, let me just, your question was a process question, but really it goes to this fundamental issue. You know, will we be able to come together as Republicans, Democrats, a couple independents who are interested in working with us to solve problems? And look, what we're going to see on the floor today is, in a sense, a charade because, you know, both sides are going to be offering procedural amendments, and then we'll end up with a 60-vote threshold if we get amendments. And, you know, at the end of the day, they're looking to vitiate cloture. They're looking to get rid of all the points of order and so on so that they can just have a Democrat proposal that passes at the end of the day. That's not a negotiation. And so our point is really very simple. I mean, breaking through all this stuff about process and minority rights and so on, let's get together and figure out what makes sense for the American people. And there was an important point made earlier about the House. I don't think we should leave the president out of this either. You know, it was the president who called on us to do a 3-month extension, and he said during that time period he wanted to improve and reform the UI program so it worked better to connect people with the jobs that are out there, give them the skills so they could access these jobs. That's what he told me. That's what he told Susan. That's what he's told other people and said publicly. We've asked the president to help play a role here. I know Susan has talked to him. I have not. I've tried to unsuccessfully. But we need to come together as adults, as we said on the floor last week, and talk about the problem and talk about potential solutions, understanding that the House is going to have a little different approach. And if we had done that, we wouldn't be shutting off the negotiation now. For, you know, whatever process is about to happen on the floor, it essentially shuts off the negotiation for now. We'd be instead saying, okay, maybe we have to stop in order to deal with the omnibus. Maybe there's other things that come up, fine. But let's keep this negotiation going in a serious good faith effort rather than simply rejecting what we have proposed, which we thought was definitely in good faith and consistent with Harry Reid's own proposal, consistent with the president's budget proposal on UI and SSDI. And let's get to yes. And if we're not going to do that, then ultimately we are failing the people we represent. And that's why I think this was an opportunity for us to do something not just important for unemployment insurance, but for this institution and for our country. It's not over. I agree with what was said earlier by all my colleagues. We'll go through this process today on the floor. It'll end up in a very predictable way. And then I hope that we'll be able to get back to work on finding a solution.
You know, the bottom line here is our agreement was responded to by the fact that the president, Harry Reid said, we will agree to let you do what you want to do as long as you do it through the procedures that we'll impose on you, 60 votes. But when it comes to what we want to do, we want the right to you to waive those procedures for yourself and do it our way. So it was doomed from the beginning. It put us in an impossible position at that particular point in time. And so the outcome was clear before that's not negotiation. That's not working together to come to an acceptable compromise on this. And we would hope that we could, even if they'd come back with an alternative proposal, but essentially it's our bill, going to be our bill, and you can't use the procedures we're going to use to force you to 60. We want 50, and you have to agree to that. That's the bottom line.
Thank you, everybody.
Senator,